Stop scrolling. Every single take you've heard about this Jay-Z interview is a lie. Everyone thinks this is just another petty shot at Drake. It's not. This is a calculated autopsy of a collapsing industry. You think you understand why Jay-Z dropped this warning right now? You don't. What the media is actively hiding from you is that this was never about age. It was an expose on the fake reality keeping your favorite artists afloat. At first, it just sounded like a billionaire's opinion. Then the corporate lawsuits dropped, the facades cracked, and that's when the entire narrative shattered. But when you uncover the one devastating truth Drake is absolutely terrified to put on his next record, it flips your entire perspective. Let us set the stage first, because context is everything in conversations like this one. Jay-Z sat down and made a series of interconnected points that, stripped to their core, are almost impossible to argue with. He said that artists who try to recreate something they were never truly connected to are fighting gravity. He said that the best music comes from people who are actually living what they are describing, people whose reality and their art occupy the same space. He praised artists who are digging into emotionally authentic territory, loss, parenthood, legacy, the interior life of a person who has survived long enough to understand what survival actually costs. He literally said that a record rooted in genuine human experience can be made in 1996 or in 2026 and still land with the same force. That is not a complicated observation. That is not a provocative theory designed to manufacture controversy. That is one of the most fundamental truths that has ever been spoken about creative work in any medium, in any era. And somehow, people process those words and turn them into a narrative that Jay-Z is out here targeting Drake. This is where we need to stop, breathe, and really examine what is actually happening beneath the surface of this conversation. Because the moment those words entered circulation, certain commentators immediately went to work. The "he's talking about Drake" angle got louder by the hour, and with it came the inevitable follow-up. Jay-Z is a hypocrite. Jay-Z is hating. Jay-Z is a powerful man using coded language to take shots at someone he perceives as a threat to his legacy. Now, is it possible Jay-Z led Drake somewhere in his mind when he was making these points? Absolutely possible. Drake is turning 40 this year. Drake has spent several recent albums heavily targeting a demographic that keeps getting younger while he keeps getting older. Drake is the most commercially dominant figure in hip-hop right now, and his entire identity has been constructed around staying permanently relevant to the youngest possible audience. If Jay-Z is describing a trap that aging artists fall into, Drake fits that description more visibly than almost anyone currently active in the game. But here's what gets deliberately ignored every single time this conversation surfaces. A message does not become wrong because of who it is aimed at. You do not get to dismiss a truth because you have emotional loyalty to the person on the receiving end of it. That is not analysis, that is not commentary, that is bias costumed as logic, and it deserves to be called exactly what it is. So let us address the hypocrisy argument head on, because that is the loudest counter being thrown around right now. The argument goes like this. Jay-Z said 30 is the new 20. Jay-Z released a record called Forever Young when he was around 40. Jay-Z built his public image on the idea that he was defying time, defying the natural cycle of artists aging out of cultural relevance. And now, at 56, he has the audacity to stand up and tell other artists to embrace their age, to make music that reflects where they actually are in life. On the surface, squinting from a distance, that can sound contradictory. But when you actually look at what Jay-Z was creating during those years, when you actually listen to what he was making and saying, the argument disintegrates completely. When Jay-Z was saying 30 is the new 20, he was not making a literal biological claim. He was performing the most critical function an artist at a crossroads can ever perform. He was evolving his identity while staying anchored to who he fundamentally was. Think carefully about what his catalog actually sounded like during that period. He was not releasing party anthems designed to chase a teenage demographic that kept getting younger, while he kept getting older. He was making music about ambition in its mature form, wealth in its full complexity, the psychological weight of sustained achievement, the loneliness that sometimes lives inside extraordinary success, the questions that only reveal themselves once you have already gotten everything you said you wanted. He literally was aging his audience alongside him, growing them up with him, giving the person who had been riding with him since the late 90s a reason to still feel seen a decade later.
That is not fighting age, that is weaponizing wisdom. And the Forever Young record was not a denial of his own maturity, it was a declaration of vitality in the middle of transformation. There is an enormous difference between those two things, and the people calling him a hypocrite are either pretending not to see that difference, or they genuinely have not taken the time to think it through. And then there is 444. If you want the clearest possible evidence of what Jay-Z was communicating in this interview, you do not need to analyze his words any further. You just need to listen to that album. This was a man standing in front of millions of people and choosing radical honesty over the comfortable armor of bravado. He talked openly about infidelity, he talked about therapy, he talked about the fear of leaving his children a legacy built on something hollow. He addressed generational wealth and the enormous responsibility that comes with it. He made himself vulnerable in ways that were genuinely uncomfortable to witness precisely because they were so clearly and unmistakably real. That album drew criticism from multiple directions when it dropped. 50 Cent called it golf course music, said it felt too intellectual, too formal, too dressed up for the streets. Future had things to say, Boogie had opinions. And here is the irony that almost nobody confronts with the full honesty it deserves. The exact criticisms lobbed at Jay-Z for daring to make mature art are the same criticisms he is now warning other artists will eventually come their way if they refuse to evolve. He lived through that gauntlet personally. He built 444 anyway, he let it absorb every shot, and it became one of the most respected pieces of work in his entire catalog precisely because it was real. He is not theorizing, he is narrating from experience that cost him something. Using that album as evidence against his credibility is the kind of intellectual dishonesty that should genuinely embarrass the people making the argument. Now, let us talk about Drake specifically, because that is what everyone in this conversation actually wants to examine. Drake is 39 years old and turning 40 this year. He arrived in hip-hop as something genuinely new, emotionally transparent in ways that male artists had rarely allowed themselves to be publicly, commercially savvy in ways that traditional street rap had not fully explored, capable of moving between singing and rapping at a time when that fluidity was still widely considered a liability. For a significant stretch of years, he pulled off one of the most impressive high-wire acts in modern music, staying relevant to the youngest streaming audience while maintaining enough credibility to hold the respect of the broader hip-hop community. That is genuinely difficult, and for a long time, he made it look completely effortless. But something has shifted. If you're honest with yourself and you have been paying close, careful attention to his recent output, you can feel that shift embedded in the music itself. The distance between who Drake actually is right now, a nearly 40-year-old man with extraordinary wealth, a son, a complicated and very public personal history, and 15 years of industry battles compounding behind him, and what a significant portion of his recent music is saying, has grown into a gap that is becoming increasingly hard to pretend away. The Kendrick Lamar battle was a watershed moment for reasons that go much deeper than who landed the harder punches. What that moment illuminated was something that Drake's streaming dominance had been successfully obscuring for years. Streaming numbers are real and they are powerful, but they are also one of the most effective forms of artistic camouflage ever invented. When your older catalog is generating hundreds of millions of plays every single month across every platform, it creates a statistical environment where it becomes nearly impossible to distinguish between an artist who is currently thriving on the merit of new work and an artist who is being kept economically afloat by the gravitational pull of their own legacy. Drake's most recent projects have not resonated the way his earlier work resonated. And a significant number of people who identify strongly as Drake supporters are aware of this on some private level. They just will not say it out loud because it feels disloyal to admit. But there is a version of loyalty that genuinely serves the artist, and there is a version that slowly suffocates them while wearing the face of support. Protecting someone from every uncomfortable truth until they wake up one day completely disoriented is not love. It is comfort dressed up as loyalty. The lawsuit Drake filed against Universal Music Group added a fascinating and revealing dimension to all of this. Here is an artist publicly declaring that the industry machinery built around him has turned against his interests, that the promotional mechanisms he once benefited from have been weaponized against his reputation and his name. Whether or not the legal arguments ultimately hold, the emotional subtext underneath that action is unmistakable. This is a man in genuine conflict with genuine forces, navigating real consequences with real stakes.
And that raw, unprocessed material, the tension between individual artistic identity and corporate power, between personal narrative and carefully managed public perception, between who someone is and who the industry needs them to appear to be, is exactly the kind of authentic territory Jay-Z is urging artists to mine and to make art from. The revelation about his son, the ongoing questions about how his private personal reality aligned with the image his music projects, the complicated aftermath of the most public artistic defeat of his career, none of that has been genuinely wrestled with in his music. It has been circled, deflected, responded to in legal filings, and managed with press strategy. And listeners can feel that management operating even when they cannot consciously identify or articulate it. Here is the deeper truth that both sides in this debate consistently sidestep. Jay-Z is not saying Drake lacks talent. He is not saying Drake should retire. He is not even suggesting that Drake's commercial dominance is somehow manufactured or illegitimate. He is saying something far more challenging and far more personal than any of those things. He is saying that the next chapter, if it is going to matter beyond the first streaming week, if it is going to add something genuinely durable to the culture, rather than just generate another round of temporary attention, has to emerge from a place of real reckoning. You can maintain a presence in this game indefinitely. You can keep releasing music and keep your name circulating forever. But there is a categorical difference between being present and having impact. There is a difference between being heard and being felt. And the artists who make that crossing from one category into the other are almost universally the ones who found the courage to be truthful about who they actually became, not just who they used to be back when it was easier. Look at how the most significant artistic pivots in hip-hop actually happened when you examine the history honestly. Look at Nas reaching into the raw wound of grief to make God's Son after his mother passed away. Look at Kanye dismantling his own commercial formula completely to make 808s and Heartbreak when the combined weight of loss and heartbreak made continuing as before feel actively dishonest. Look at Jay-Z himself systematically taking apart his own mythology to construct 444. Every transformative moment in every lasting career in this genre came from an artist choosing depth over safety, vulnerability over armor, truth over the comfortable performance of strength, and every artist who refused that choice, who kept building the same structure of flash and invincibility regardless of how much reality was quietly accumulating outside the studio walls, those artists' discographies feel thin and brittle when you return to them years later. The entertainment value is still there, but the substance departed the moment real experience stopped being invited into the room. There is also something critical to be said about the culture of agreement that develops around artists at a certain level of success, because it bears directly on this entire situation. When you have spent 15 years as the dominant commercial force in your genre, every person orbiting your world has a financial relationship to your continued success. Your creative collaborators, your business team, your management, your label liaisons, all of them have powerful incentives to assure you that every choice you are making is the correct one. Every record is a classic. Every decision is visionary. Every person offering a critical perspective is motivated by jealousy and is not worth your time. That environment is artistically corrosive in ways that are genuinely invisible from inside it. The only real protection against it is exposure to people who care enough about you as a human being to engage with you honestly, people who do not have a revenue stream tied to your comfort level. Jay-Z speaking these truths publicly is, in a strange and unconventional way, a version of that honesty operating at the largest possible scale, not dressed up in concern or framed as advice from a friend, just stated plainly for anyone with the maturity to receive it.
Now back to the hypocrisy charge one final time, because this needs to be closed out completely. The people pointing at Jay-Z and shouting hypocrite were, by their own admission in these very conversations, calling Jay-Z old when he was 40. They were saying he had aged out of what the culture needed. They were using the word grandfather as an insult. And now those same people are defending Drake at the same age and behaving as if 40 is essentially the beginning of an artist's prime. You cannot apply different standards to identical circumstances based purely on who you are personally invested in seeing succeed. If 40 was past expiration for Jay-Z, then 40 is past expiration for Drake. If Jay-Z owed the culture evolution at 40, then Drake owes the culture evolution at 40. Either both of these men have a responsibility to grow into who they actually are now,
Or age is completely irrelevant to artistic merit, and the original attack on Jay-Z was never about age at all. You have to pick a lane, because operating simultaneously in both directions is not an argument, it is a tell. It reveals exactly how little the principle matters and how much the allegiance does. What makes this whole conversation matter beyond the specific names involved is what it exposes about how we collectively process the idea of authenticity in hip-hop. We claim to hold realness above almost every other value in this culture. Authenticity is the foundation of credibility, and yet the moment an artist tries to be genuinely real about aging, about the actual texture of adult life, about the things that occupy the mind of a 40-year-old person managing wealth and fatherhood and reputation and legacy simultaneously, we tell them collectively that this is not what we want to hear. We call it boring. We say it does not hit. We say the audience will not stream that. And in doing so, we construct the very conditions that produce the hollow, disposable music we then complain about incessantly. We built the cage and then act confused about why everyone inside it looks confined. Jay-Z looked at all of this and said the quiet part at full volume. The artist making music that genuinely moves people right now, music that carries actual emotional weight, that will still be revisited in a decade as something that meant something real, are the ones who stopped fighting the current of time and started working with it. They are letting everything that has actually happened to them become the raw material for something worth hearing, including the difficult parts, including the embarrassing parts, including the parts they would rather manage quietly with legal teams and press releases. That is not a formula for a specific sound or style. It is a philosophy of creative honesty that transcends every subgenre and every era and applies universally to anyone who has ever picked up a microphone intending to say something that lasts. And underneath all of the industry context, all the specific names and albums and beef narratives, what Jay-Z is ultimately describing is a decision that every human being eventually has to confront. The moment when who you have been and who you are becoming stop occupying the same body comfortably. The moment when the performance of a former self starts costing more energy than it returns. And the choice sitting at the center of that moment. Do you keep building the facade higher and spending increasing amounts of yourself maintaining something that has quietly become fiction? Or do you turn honestly toward the actual person you have become and find out what that person has left to say? That is not a rapper's dilemma. That is not a celebrity's problem. That belongs to every single person who has ever stood at the crossing between their past and their present and had to decide whether growing up is something lost or something arrived at. Jay-Z is not running a campaign. He is not settling scores on someone else's time. He is doing what the genuinely wise always do, the thing so few people with real power ever actually choose to do. He is pointing directly at the truth, without softening it, without dressing it up, and daring anyone with enough honesty and enough courage to stop running from it and walk toward it instead. There is one more angle here that deserves its own spotlight before we close this out, and it is the one that rarely gets discussed because it is less dramatic than a beef narrative and less clickable than a hypocrisy accusation. It is the question of what Drake actually has to work with as raw creative material going into this next phase of his career. Because that question is far more interesting and far more consequential than whether Jay-Z likes him or not. Think about the actual inventory of lived experience Drake is sitting on right now. He went through the most public creative defeat in recent hip-hop history and survived it. He filed a lawsuit against one of the most powerful corporate structures in the music industry. He has a son he navigated bringing into the world under extraordinarily complicated circumstances. He has more than a decade of questions about the gap between his public persona and private reality. He has relationships with the culture, with his audience, with his collaborators that have all been tested and reshaped in ways that are genuinely complex and worth exploring. That is not a shortage of material. That is an overabundance of it. The only question is whether he is willing to actually go there, to use that inventory honestly instead of constructing another defensive posture or another round of veiled commentary. Because the version of Drake that goes there, that stops managing perception and starts making confessions, that tells the truth about losing felt like and what filing that lawsuit means and what fatherhood actually cost him, that version of Drake could make one of the most compelling records in the history of the genre. The version that keeps deferring, that keeps circling without landing, that keeps performing invincibility while the cracks are visible to everyone watching closely, that version is running out of runway faster than the streaming numbers currently suggest. And deep down, somewhere underneath all the noise of the debate, Everybody already knows it.